The fence is in Brooklyn, in an isolated corner of Red Hook by the water. I discovered it by chance one steamy summer afternoon. I was in the park nearby watching a soccer match. On my way home, I detoured along the pier. I'd been this way before, but never noticed the hole. This time, however, it caught my eye, and I stopped and sneaked through it. Inside, I found a desolate, otherworldly landscape. I couldn't help wondering who else knew about this hidden place. So I enlisted my friend Jason, and we started asking around.
So, have you noticed when you come down here this hole with this weird sort of door created on it over there?
Well, I remember when the door, right here?
Like directly across from us, there's a sort of some corrugated metal, and then it's got a snake cord wrapped around it.
No, but I remember seeing a crack over there, like kind of just like all the way to the, you could walk all the way through. It was just a very small space you could get through.
Did you ever go into the crack?
No.
Did you ever see anyone go in?
No.
Did you ever think there was anyone back there?
No.
Did you ever think about what was back there?
No.
Where have you guys been? That's the most stupidest question I've ever heard in my life.
We found a weird sort of hole over there, and we're wondering if anyone had ever, I mean, you've been here before to this site, right? Wondering if you'd ever seen anyone coming in and out of the hole.
We actually went in there.
Oh, you went in there? Okay.
Yeah.
There were
was
other
no one
people,
there.
there was no one there.
Yeah.
There's no one there. I actually know someone we study in Cornell, so I have a friend, a classmate of mine. He actually came here without anything, without any possessions, excepting himself and his clothes, and he basically picked up found objects, garbage, and started to reuse them and actually created his own shelter. It was just an experiment as to how you can live very minimally and celebrate the spirit of this place. It's not always about tearing the place down, but you just live in the place the way it is, and it actually informs perhaps a new way of living.
The odds of Animesh and I ever crossing paths were incredibly slim. Clearly, I couldn't ignore such a perfect coincidence. As promised, he put me in touch with his friend Benjamin Uyeda in Boston, whose experiences in the area went far beyond my own.
Where you from?
California.
What are you doing here?
I go to school in Cornell University, upstate New York.
Yeah.
And I'm writing about what I say is the real Red Hook. The Red Hook you won't see on television. The Red Hook you won't see in magazines. Like the way it really is. So I'm gonna live here for a few days, get some ideas. My introduction to Red Hook was, I think, during my first year of grad school at Cornell University. I was in the Masters of Architecture 2 program. And our professor for the project, we had a semester-long studio project. And pretty much all he gave us was just Red Hook. He just said, here's Red Hook, go do a project there. And his intent was to sort of do, in his initial introduction, he talked about the proposed IKEA coming in, and it was in the sort of typical sort of urban planning discipline type genre where you look at all the things that are happening there, you look for the potentials, and you do some sort of sweeping master plan that improves the site for the community, brings in new opportunities, and all these types of things. And there's a long history of architects and urban planners proposing these types of things, and rarely do you see a broad-scale vision like that, first of all, being implemented without being compromised in some way by the various interest groups. And so when we went there, we saw one of the first things that struck me is that there was these uncharted open areas. It was territory. It was unclaimed, like undiscovered territory, meaning that if you looked at a map, it said that there was a building there. But when you go there in reality, there was no building. And it was so amazing to see so close. I mean, you could literally see the Statue of Liberty and to be standing in a place that was not on any map. The texture of it was visually very interesting. I mean, when you have these various layers of decay that I think architects often find that romantic. It's a texture that's the opposite of TGI Fridays or Applebee's, and for people that sort of identify themselves as not being a crowd of that sort of consumer group, it becomes an equally obvious sort of aesthetic attraction. Some of the groups we saw there were people from Vice magazine,
and they were taking photos of sports cars with this graffiti in the background. So my initial sort of thought was, here's this urban gallery that just sort of happened. I mean, there's these it's exactly what you would think an urban gallery would be. It's concrete is the white walls. It's open to the sky. It was this very Miesian art gallery for graffiti.
There's no question, graffiti is one of the space's defining characteristics. Shielded from view, the long, thick walls provide lots of room to work. It's well known to local writers, but has attracted some more prominent names too.
So how many times have you been back there?
Like millions.
Oh, millions, lots, okay. And there wasn't anyone back there when you went back there?
Well, sometimes there's people in there, but I don't really care. They don't mess with me. I don't mess with them.
When did you first discover? Wait, what do you call it? Tell us what you.
Oh, we call it Bums Manor.
Bums Manor. Bums Manor.
Bums Manor been there forever. There's always been graffiti. Well, even I think if you still went in there, you still see stuff from like the 70s and 80s. I have stuff in there. This kid Seckham has stuff in there. Krav, Rescue, Yep 3, Plasma Slug, Emo, No One. Yeah, basically TNF Crew, BFF Crew, 295, Icon has stuff in there.
There was a lot of space in there before, but then a lot of people started going over people, so everybody went there to just take it over. But it's a Red Hook spot, and people don't want people from Red Hook. People don't want people from other places to come in there unless you respect it, because you have to get a pass. You have to get a pass to come to our hood.
What's the pass? Where do you get the pass?
You gotta know somebody, one of the crews, or something like that.
Hello, how are you? No, we won't. I don't think that academia is about doing imaginary projects. It's about doing projects under a certain umbrella that allows you to invoke a different type of insight. I didn't know that I wanted to work with homeless people, but I knew that Red Hook had potential. And in embedding myself in it, I started to discover the potentials to intervene and assist the homeless community in a way that beforehand wouldn't be apparent to me. Architecture is a service profession, so you can't service people that will never come to you for their service. So it had to create a new sort of mode of working, a new process of design. And so that's why I actually used the gritty texture to create sort of a film product or a reality TV show product, which I could use to generate the capital, to generate the interest, which would drive and fund the projects for this particular group of people.
How did you come across that specific site?
So one of the things we saw that was interesting when we were looking at the maps of Red Hook is we saw that sort of long hook out into the water. And so we were walking down there next to the park, and we literally saw this sort of rusted gash in this corrugated metal fencing. And being inquisitive, we poked our head in, and we instantly saw this beautiful wide open field of concrete. And within that field, we saw these various shipping containers, which had very clearly been converted into different residences. And so here we saw what looked like to us a sort of almost I think it was initially one of my friends described it as a gated community. There was shopping carts out in the front yards of each little residence, and there's obviously a handful of people living there.
Hoping to learn more about the site and its graffiti, I dug around online. Eventually, I found pictures taken by several Brooklyn photographers who'd been inside. One was Sonia Shield, who also writes the blog Brooklyn Ramblings.
As an artist, I'm fascinated by sites that are where you can see the history, where you can see what it used to be, and you can see how the place has sort of degraded over time and other uses have come in, and you can see all these different marks on a site. And this one is particularly interesting because it's on the waterfront, and it's almost regressed back to nature in a lot of ways. It's say 100 yards from the harbor. It could be anywhere, And then in the midst of it is this pond. It's got reeds in it. I mean, I haven't been in the pond, and you're not gonna get me in the pond, but I guess that, you know, it's a couple feet deep. You see a lot more full pieces. So, you know, that's really different than some of the, you know, individual pieces of throw-ups that you'll see in other areas. It's also a site that has its own aesthetic and mystique. You have to trespass to get in there, and you know, you're off the street, so that's just very different.
Was anyone at home when you went there? Was anyone there, or
It
was it
totally empty. Yesterday I went over to check it out, but it's been pretty well blocked off.
Who closes up a hole? When it's closed up sometimes, is it the cops? Is it the people who live in there, or?
I don't know. Sometimes it's the people who live in there because they want to block themselves in, but everybody knows there's holes in there all the time. So.
Right. Is that the only one, or are there others?
There's others in there.
Yeah, the cops just hassle listening to them a lot. Like, people get stabbed in places, and they're worried about us going in there bombing. They're worried about us smoking weed and
hitting walls,
tagging walls, and
when people are shooting and getting stabbed all over the place. Like,
all right, I gotta clarify something. Just like there's people who do art, and then there's bombers, because like there's a lot of artwork in there. It just gets taken out, and it's I'm a bomber, and it's kind of funny to me. I don't really care about that. But then again, there's real respectable pieces in there. And then there's some people in there who are just like shitty, and then they're just coming in there and they're messing everything up. But then again, well, art is art any way you put it, but it's all right.
One thing about the site is certain. Its days are numbered. The old shipyard next door has already been razed to make way for an IKEA megastore, and it's only a matter of time before it's developed too. The latest rumor being is a Bed Bath & Beyond. The coming of IKEA to the neighborhood has been a divisive issue in the past, but at this point is a done deal.
I heard about the IKEA from Marty Moskowitz. He wrote me a letter. And I said, well, all right, and I'm in support this. It will improve the neighborhood. It'll give these kids jobs, they need jobs.
Well, I guess you have to understand that there are two constituencies of people here. You have the artists who are, I wouldn't say they're elitist, but they are certainly in a much more privileged place in society. And then you have the people who live in the projects, who are people without jobs.
Very concretely, the campaign to bring IKEA into the neighborhood was designed to create conflict and split apart the neighborhood.
This area now is a commodity, okay? You have the waterfront right here. Got waterfront like that since the beginning of time. But now that they're building condos and putting things back there, and white people are moving in, can I say that? White people are moving in, understand? Yeah. And now you see white people, they're comfortable walking because they know. It's ours now.
There was an extensive campaign long before it was public to raise support for the creation of local jobs. There was also really good organizing to push the anti-IKEA forces towards an environmentalism, sort of knee-jerk, NIMBY environmentalist response.
The artist, it was more sort of like a little bit of, think of sort of artistic snobbishness. IKEA is for the masses. But there were practical constraints that were raised too about the traffic and things like that that they felt that the area didn't have the infrastructure for. But a lot of the people we talked to in the project housing said, well, I mean, that's jobs within walking distance.
They promised to bring jobs into the area. If that actually ends up happening, that's a good thing for the area.
The more they open up, the better it will be.
I feel like it's a legendary place, and I don't like IKEA, so I don't think they should have it there.
It will definitely stimulate the neighborhood as well as the economy.
I hope I get proved wrong, that there will be 60 or 100 people from Red Hook who are working there. I'll be surprised. And Red Hook needs 60 jobs. In a town of 10,000 people, that's actually a significant change.
It will improve the neighborhood from the standpoint, it'll teach them a little bit about, excuse me, taste and somebody else's furniture. IKEA furniture is very modern.
What about like the jobs? Like they'll bring jobs, people will come to IKEA and then they'll go to the stores around here. None of that. That doesn't matter.
No, that doesn't matter. They should just leave Brooklyn alone. Brooklyn is a cool place. They're just trying to gentrify it, and they're trying to bring all this other crap into our towns.
If IKEA was there, you would alternate.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't come. I wouldn't come here anymore.
Within 20 years, you're not going to recognize this.
So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It depends if you're poor, or if you're black or you're white.
Things like IKEA and maybe this one becoming an industrial plant should happen, but because this has always been a working seaport, and things like IKEA and what might happen here will ensure that it's working. But I guess the danger is that, like you said, it might be overrun by people from outside, so it has to be done very sensitively.
Oh, it's James. Hey, James.
When we first got there and being, foreigners to the site, the thing we were obviously most concerned with was safety and security. So the age-old adage of building on high ground served us well. We found this hill of dirt that was behind this big pile of crumpled up sheet metal. The metal was great because if anybody was sort of climbing up the hill, we'd hear them banging around the metal, so it sort of became our alarm system. And we built back up against the two of the concrete walls. So we had two walls essentially, already built for us. Another key consideration was the drainage. It was raining quite a bit while we were there. We didn't want wet floors that we would lie in. And so it's important to dig out a drainage ditch underneath the house, and then we built a slatted floor. So if any water did get in, it would have a place to get out. Basic structure of the building, we found some old metal bars lying around. So with that, we built a very basic steel frame over which we stretched trash bags and some clear plastic drop cloths that we found. So we built against these concrete walls, and we covered them with aluminum foil and the safety blanket. Safety blanket cost about $1.99. They're even cheaper to make. And so what that did is it allowed us to have a very small amount of coals, but all the heat would get reflected back into the main structure.
We got Ben here doing some laser technology.
Let's see, we got a 64. Should give us a little bit of heat. And right now, what is the external temperature? It's 52 degrees outside. And one of the things that we built just for fun was this little cabana out next to the lake. And the idea being that once we had our primary shelter secured, the interests of the architect go to the superfluous.
And that's the lake, so to speak.
That's the lake. They call it the puddle, actually.
What did they call it? How did they refer to the yard?
Most of the people we talked to called it the yard. And that's what when they would have visitors, they'd say, we're going over to the yard.
The Red Hook Community Farm is right around the corner from the yard and will clearly be one of the groups most affected by IKEA's arrival. It's run by the local nonprofit organization Added Value, and co-founder Ian Marvey has seen the neighborhood change considerably over the last few years.
The mission of the program is to promote the sustainable development of the neighborhood. So what that means to us is that we want people to understand and participate in creating a stronger, healthier, more vibrant community that is more economically self-sufficient. It will never be self-sufficient, but where the local economic ties are tighter, where there is an understanding of people's relationship to one another and relationship to their environment. We do that through urban agriculture and youth empowerment. The way most people interface with the program is through the teens running volunteer activities out there, through teens doing education and outreach, through folks coming to the farmers market and purchasing their food from our teens. If you had a map, we would be on the intersection of Columbia and Halleck and Otsego. And actually the entrance to the IKEA will be on Halleck at Otsego. So the southwest corner of the farm is essentially the entrance to the world's biggest IKEA. The teens enter the program currently as a summer project. They're with us for 7 weeks, 24 hours a day. Currently, we're engaged in a large composting project, so they learn a lot about the food system, and particularly the backside of the food system at this point. And what we try and hold ourselves accountable to is that on a daily basis, we're trying to affect their head, their hands, their heart, and their pocketbook. And then we obviously say that we're not growing farmers, we're growing citizens. This community, since I've been here, relatively speaking, has been quiet. And there's a huge drug trade in the neighborhood. Random acts of violence are relatively small. Random crime is relatively small. Nobody's getting mugged in Red Hook. And when I got here, 50% of the land that was zoned for housing was vacant. And that's changing radically and rapidly. A lot of that was allowed to burn out during the 70s and 80s, just like, the rest of New York. And, we're one of the closest places left that hadn't gentrified. So people thought, quote, that this place was protected because there was no subway line. And that's actually been part of the attraction, is that people can own a car here. People were like, well, what do you do? And, it was pretty quick that folks were like, well, you just bring your SUV to Red Hook. You bring your Volkswagen Passat to Red Hook. What's interesting and unique, and I think a lot of folks don't understand this about Red Hook, is there's always been a divide between the public housing and the folks who lived in private housing. So gentrification is filling in and pushing out people who lived back here, people who lived in
the projects.
Not those folks. However, they're experiencing their own situations, like they are over in Marcy houses and stuff like that. I mean, they're buying people out of their leases. They're not renewing leases. I mean, they're steadily trying to empty out that space, and that's a policy. They will make huge amounts of money off of that.
See, to give you a story about the projects, this project, the Marcy project, the Fort Greene projects, Red Hook project, all these projects was made for lower income. But now they're taking these lower income projects, understand? They're not. It's no longer New York City housing. Now there's another name, I forgot the name of it, but they're turning them into co-ops. So if you spit in the hallway now, you're out and you have no protection. See, and that's the whole idea.
The advent of it, the opening, if we're set up right, we'll have the busiest farm stand in New York State. Then there's a ethical question and a practical business question. Do you want to partner with them? IKEA in Ohio and Illinois composts. They shred all their cardboard, they grind all their food waste, they compost it on site, they feed it to worms, and they sell it back out. A not-for-profit is contracted to do that, and they sell it back out in the IKEA as bagged, finished compost. And that money then goes back into this not-for-profit program. That's a very cool cycle. The abandoned area is just, it's the land of the wild dogs, is how most people refer to it. It was pretty dangerous back there, actually, for a long time. A lot of prostitution going on in and out of there. So most folks, that's what they knew about it.
Red Hook used to be known for a large amount of wild dogs that would sort of roam the streets. And they said those had been taken care of recently, but they said in the past, the transients and homeless people had to worry about actually getting attacked by stray dogs.
I was actually just back in there last week for a little while, trying to trap wild dogs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, what are you up to? Just resting?
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. It's a nice day.
Most of the people that we met in the yard had a real fear of the projects. And that was one of the first things that they all warned us once we sort of became friendly with them. So they said, oh, stay out of the projects. Whatever you do, stay out of the projects. And they had told stories about, being beaten up by the school children, just for fun and things like that. The primary age group that we saw was, I would say, 40 to 60-year-olds. No one ever asked us for money. Not once. Once we were living there, no one asked us for money, but they saw that my brother, whenever he would smoke, they'd bum a cigarette off of him.
Yeah, there's always been bums back there. Yeah, we started naming them.
Yeah, it's got to the point where we see it so often they have names.
Right.
Yeah.
What are some of the names?
Titty Man,
Tree Branch Man,
IKEA.
Right.
Gay Saturday.
Yeah.
Gay Saturday.
Gay Saturday.
They referred to each other as the junkies and the crackheads. The crackheads being the people that used to live in the projects, and the junkies being the heroin addicts that came when the clinic opened up. Javier was the man I talked to the most, and he only lived there part of the time. So he had a lot of friends. He was friends with Dale, even though that was one of the rare sort of crackhead junkie friendships. So the West Side Story of the place. We eventually ended up giving him the shelter that we built, and he lived there, moved into there full time. He had one of the only shelters that was properly ventilated and had an active heating system and security mechanisms and a garden. We planted all sorts of vegetables in there and created water catchment systems. So he was pretty excited about the house. He said it was a little too small. He says you should have built it bigger. So it wasn't without criticism that he accepted it. Sheila was very talkative, but again, she didn't live there. She would come in and visit and tell us all about it and ramble on and on and on. Offer us sex for cigarettes, typical neighborly stuff. There's a very elderly man named James, and he was just a habitual collector of stuff. All day long, he had this rigorous habit of going out and collecting. He'd fill up his shopping containers. He'd bring back stuffed animals, plastic toys, old toasters, microwaves, anything he found on the streets that looked like a domestic item. Would bring it up, would bring it into the yard, and would sort of line it up on the concrete, look at it for a while, then go out and collect more stuff. So Dale was the tattoo artist, and that had his shop set up in the basement of the Green Building. And I see him running into the yard, just screaming, going, "Motherfucker shot off my fucking finger." Apparently is what happened is he was trying to trade his methadone that he got from the clinic to someone else for some other types of drugs. And the guy just pulled a gun on him, and Dale reached down and tried to grab the gun and push it away. But his little finger went over the barrel of the gun, and the guy pulled the trigger, taking the end of his little finger off completely. And so I tried to calm him down, and what we ended up doing is we cauterized it. So we heated up a piece of metal that was sticking in our fireplace and got hot, and then just seared off the end of it to get it to stop bleeding.
IKEA's building plans include filling in one of the New York area's last remaining graving docks, which is just over the fence from the yard. The impending demolition is highly controversial and has galvanized a strong opposition. Transportation consultant Roberta Weisbrod and Waterfront Museum and Showboat owner David Sharps are two of the graving dock's most outspoken advocates.
It is a structure that if we wanted to build it now, would cost hundreds of millions, maybe $1 billion, and would be almost impossible to site, probably impossible. It's huge, it's about 750 feet long, wide, deep, that large vessels can come into the land. It's physically beautiful, it's rare. It's rare in that there are only 2 other graving docks in New York Harbor. They're both owned by the same business, and they both have their issues, so to speak.
Being a boat owner and having a ship and seeing what's happening with the graving dock, I can't not say something, because if nothing else, the selfish reason of I gotta come out of the water on a regular basis just to, keep up with the hull. And all the other historic boats in the New York Harbor need to go somewhere. As it is now, the commercial graving docks are full.
There was a public hearing at the borough president's office. I didn't testify. David Sharps did, others did. And I must admit, I thought that because of their political activity, that the IKEA project was inevitable. Then I started realizing what was at stake, and we didn't have to have the waste of a critically important resource.
For many years, I worked for Carnival Cruise Lines as a juggler with a variety act called Serious Foolishness. After that, I went to school in Paris and studied with the L'École Jacques Lecoq. Had about 30 different nationalities represented, where we all studied movement and mask and theater. And while I was in Paris, I befriended a captain who went to the Philippines, who had me look after his boat while he was gone. And that was my first boat in 1984 to 86 there in Paris on the Seine. Of course, I went back to the mud. This thing had 300 tons of mud in it. And it was, you know, over my head, 8 feet of muck. I put on chest waders and was the human spoon, you know, stirring it up and pumping it out. And little by little, poquito a poquito, you know, I've brought this place back to life. It was built in 1914, 92 years old. And she's just swaggering her hips here in the tides in Brooklyn since 1994. And the Brooklyn has been a wonderful community that has embraced our kind of funky little barge, but at the same time, a very professional and heartfelt and sincere effort to bring people back to the water, which when I started 22 years ago, you know, the waterfronts were pretty desolate. So the barge is really trying to help explain those shifts in transportation and commerce history that have made our waterfronts look the way they do. You know, we didn't lose the war in our home shores. And kids will look around and it looks like our neighborhood's been bombed out. I mean, most people don't understand why our waterfronts look the way they do. But, you know, and it's not because industry has gone away. There's more goods and commerce in the New York harbor than ever before, but you don't see the thousands of stevedores moving goods. The transfer of property no longer happens because there's the container, there's the trucks, the buses, the highways. It's all, you know, gone are the caulkers and all the boats that had the tugs, the barges, the captains, the carpenters, the cooks, the coopers, you know, all these livelihoods. Hundreds of thousands of people used to be focused on getting our goods to your door, to the merchants. And, you know, we do that now with technology, and we've freed up our lives to go on and do other things, you know, and there were really hundreds of thousands of jobs that were related to the waterfront.
We need to move our people and our goods by water. There's too much land congestion, and it would benefit neighborhoods to do that. And take isolated neighborhoods and make them active. It provides jobs. The jobs are needed.
When IKEA went before the community board, I feel a little bit cheated because they told the community board that they were going to, quote, maintain the graving dock.
They set out the word that they were preserving the graving dock.
Lo and behold, you know what they meant by maintain? They're going to draw a line around in the parking lot to show where it was. Now, there's a big difference between maintaining the graving dock and drawing a long line around the parking lot.
Like a dead body. Like
a dead body. That analogy is pretty poignant, isn't it? And we're not trying to defeat IKEA. You know, we're not saying, no, you can't bring your shopping mall. I might not personally want it myself, but I mean, they have certain rights. The most important thing, if these big boxes are going to come into our neighborhood, I want you to treat us like a neighbor. Take Greg O'Connell here with the Fairway building. Historic preservation, he's pointed these Civil War era warehouses, he provides public access at his own cost, no cost to the taxpayers, works with small entities like the Waterfront Museum, Dance Theater, etc., the Brook BWAC, Dancing in the Streets, all of those things which have made this a focal cultural center.
It would be great for their customers to not have a humongous parking lot, big open space, windswept, cold, and instead have an enclosed 2-story parking garage. So it would be better for the customers. We'd preserve the graving dock for its needed use.
They have so much money and they bought so much space. I find it a little bit hard to believe that both things couldn't be accommodated.
I honestly think they made a mistake because I went back to all the documents and they didn't realize that ship repair was ongoing at the graving dock because they relied on an old document before it got reopened.
I'm hoping they come to the table because to this point they just did not come to the table. The moment they come to the table, they're going to, I guess they realize they're going to have to compromise.
I mean, I think the graving dock is just a result of poor campaign planning on all sides and really good organizing on the IKEA front.
How did we win? Either through the Corps of Engineers or the mayor sitting down with IKEA and saying, really, you could have a win-win situation here.
You know, Red Hook is such a special place. It's not Disneyland. It is authentic Brooklyn, cobblestone streets, warehouses, you know, the stuff that On the Waterfront was written about, of course, is here in Red Hook. I mean, the things that people loved are still here. It hasn't been wasted away because the BQE built a wall and the fish port went belly up here in our neighborhood. The government seized with eminent domain a lot of businesses, and the other businesses split while they could get out, and for many years it laid fallow. And it's been saved. Now we need to go forward to the next, you know, you can't resist change or you break. But if you don't plan for change, and if you don't plan wisely for change, well, then you can muck it up in one fell swoop. And that's what I'm really worried about in our neighborhood.
Have you ever been to the area next, if you look at the map even,
Yeah.
next to the graving dock, it's sort of an abandoned area with the blocks
Yeah.
and the graffiti. Have you ever been back there?
I used to be docked with this vessel on Columbia Street, and I would take my kids in the morning to the bus stop, which was right in front of this building. And there were, you know, a lot of homeless people that lived in there. You would see them, you know, busy people out with their recycling carts with whatever it was that they did during the daytime. You know, it was very much a homesteader place where I guess they were the squats, you know, and little places in the fence. They didn't bother too many people.
To me, Red Hook is like a little town in California somewhere that you go in and you're trying to figure out, what did I just do? Did I just walk out of the big city and just walk into a little town?
Yeah.
That's the very first time I ever came here. That's how I looked at Red Hook.
I came back exactly 1 year to the day back to the yard, and the hole was closed. It was boarded up, and over the top of the fence I could see bulldozers. So I climbed up to the top of the fence and looked in, and I saw that all the shipping containers that people had lived in were gone. They had been removed completely from the site. All the existing structures had been bulldozed, and the building that I had built on a little hill of dirt had also been bulldozed. What I suspect is that happened is that they knew that that was a site where they were going to build, and rather than, the closer they get to construction or to demolition, the more eyes are going to be on the site. It could have presented kind of a dicey situation for the owner of the property. Since these people had been living there for a long time, there very easily could have been some debate about what their rights were as squatters, considering this land had been left vacant for quite a while.
But my hero was, there's a person down here on Atlantic Avenue, you can check it out, Atlantic Avenue and Vanderbilt. This man, he was a squatter. He built a house. He built a house. And for 20 years, he lived in that squatter's house because he said, no, it don't belong to the city, don't belong to nobody. They finally got him out, though, in protest, but they did it in the night. And there was never a word about it.
I've seen cops come down and beat homeless people to try to move them out, to move them on. And, you know, these people are just, you know, some of them are really lovely people that have, each of them have a story. Some of them have been wealthy, some of them just can't cope, some of them almost got it together and didn't, or had a loved one that something happened to that they used to lean on. And, you know, you have to realize everybody's pretty fragile. You know, life is fragile, and lives are really pretty close to the edge.
After living in there, you come to see it as something else. You see it as, you sort of see beyond the texture, and you see the opportunities for shelter and those types of things. So once it had been cleared again, it was sort of, it made me sort of realize and sort of think about how naive I was to originally consider it just that type of, oh, it's empty. It's just, you know, it's just graffiti on concrete. It looks great. It's great texture, great backdrop for something. So it still had that sort of, you know, the texture is what remained, but all the sort of life had been extinguished from it.
History would say that the developers are going to come in and buy everything up and develop it in a way that works for them and that doesn't necessarily have a vision for the city at large.
In a sense, I wasn't in the film, it wasn't about designing the shelter. It was about designing the commission to interact and propose something for that site. And the actual physical construction, which is normally the last part of the architectural process, was actually the first part.
It's a rough neighborhood, but if you're born here and you're raised here and you come here and you spend 10 years here or 20 years here, the people leave, they get to know you. I mean, there's not a neighborhood in the world that's perfect, and this one isn't perfect either. But it's up to you. If you don't bother people, they don't bother you.
Now is the age of development. Under the guise of promising A, B, and C, whether they be jobs or housing or whatever they would be, you know, it seems like you can make your slick presentation to show why this would be good, and then you get your rubber stamp and you go ahead and you do that on a big scale, and all of a sudden we've blasted our infrastructure.
I'm trying to fuse architecture with activism, where you take the interest and you're not waiting for ideal change. The activist is incredibly impatient.
IKEA's gonna get this too.
IKEA comes, they're getting bombed. Not like that.
They're just
not like that.
We're not, you know.
We're not terrorists.
We're not terrorists. We're just street art terrorists, that's all.
I think that can be done productively and fused with architecture to create a proactive type of architecture that seeks to create its own patronage and its own commissions.
Man, I wanna go in there and just do fillings that would just be phenomenal. Like, you just can't turn anywhere and just without seeing a filling that says P's. Oh. Like everywhere, it's just P-E-Z-E, P-E-Z-E, P-E-Z-E. That'd be cool. Take a lot of paint though.
One day soon, IKEA will arrive. Soon the yard will be completely raised, probably the graving dock too. Already the old Revere sugar refinery, a local landmark, has been torn down. More big boxes may follow. Like much of Brooklyn, the neighborhood is being transformed, for better or worse, or some degree of both. In 10 years, it will be a very different place. It's an age-old urban predicament, development at the cost of identity, repeated over and over in a city that's endlessly reconfiguring itself. No matter what happens, though, soon there will be one less ramshackle hole to wander into and then back out of, feeling, as you pull back that rusty metal flap and re-emerge onto the city street, like you've just crossed between two worlds.
What's the weirdest thing you've seen around here in all the times that you've come here?
I guess this.
What, us?
Yeah.